So, as you all know, I'm Daisy and I'm from the Leprosy Mission, and we work.
Is that redacted on anybody else's screen? I've got black bars all over mine.
Oh.
Oh, is it just me? Okay, I've got the edited version. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just.
Can everyone see it? Yeah, because I carry on. So I'm Daisy from the Leprosy Mission, and we work across 5 countries in Africa and 5 countries in Asia. And today I want to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we do in Bangladesh. But first of all, I have a question for you. How do you have your tea? Do you put the milk in first or the milk in last? What do people do?
Milk in last because I'm well educated, not
last. I'm not a monster.
Last.
No milk at all.
No milk at all. That's criminal.
Oh, that's a Dutch habit, apparently.
No milk, no sugar, no nothing.
No tea.
I'm beyond help. I'll have coffee instead.
There you go. Well, 80% of people put their milk in last, and 20% of people put it in first. So 20% is still quite high. It's quite a lot of people. But regardless of how tea is made, there's over 100 million cups of tea consumed every day in the UK. So it's a very, very popular drink here in the UK. And it comes from tea gardens like this one in Bangladesh. But here in Bangladesh, in the north, in a place called Sylhet, there's over 600,000 people living and working in these tea gardens, picking tea leaves each day to make the tea that we drink. And almost every family is affected by leprosy in these tea gardens in Bangladesh. And here, the rates of leprosy are 20 to 30 times higher than the global average. So that's thought that 1 in 7 people in these particular tea gardens have leprosy. So it's a big, big problem here. And if it's not stopped now in these communities, it will have devastating impacts for the people working in these communities, but also as it continues to spread across Bangladesh. And I wanted to tell you this morning a little story about this woman here, Aloka. She works in the tea gardens and she's a tea picker and has been since she was a teenager. She's a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 3, and she takes great pride in her family. That's her youngest grandson there in the photo. And without Aloka's income from tea picking, her family would really struggle to survive. But a couple of years ago, Aloka noticed a discoloured patch on her skin, and that's the first signs of leprosy. And she at first thought nothing of it, but over time, she started to lose the strength in her left hand, and she had trouble straightening her fingers. And picking tea leaves became very difficult. And because each tea picker, they have a skill, it's a very fine skill of picking the leaves, and then they throw it over their back into these little baskets. You can see behind she's got these baskets, but because she couldn't use her left hand so well, she could pick half the amount of tea leaves that she used to, and they get paid per tea leaf they pick, or per kilogram of tea leaves they pick. And she says, when I first heard the word leprosy, I was so frightened. If the Leprosy Mission was not here to help me, I'm sure I would have died. And so a community worker came into her tea garden, into her village, and diagnosed Aloka with leprosy. And she was given the cure to stop the disease attacking her body any further than it already had. But unfortunately, the cure doesn't reverse damage already done. So she will have to live now without the feeling in her left hand and that weakened use of her hand. And if she's not careful, her hand and her fingers will begin to claw even further into her palm as the muscles weaken, and as she doesn't have the ability to use her hand. And Aloka knows that if more time had passed, then her situation would be much worse than it is. And leprosy would have prevented her from working at all, from picking tea leaves at all, or making tea tea for her family, like here in this photo. And she said, if I couldn't work, if I wasn't a tea picker, there would be no point in living anymore. And just imagine what it would be like to not be able to provide for those that you love the most, or do what you've always done, have your livelihood taken away from you. So it's so key to find people with leprosy and diagnose them as soon as possible, because the sooner they get the cure, the less likely they are to have these devastating impacts and the loss of use in their hands and their feet. And eventually, if it carries on, it leads to amputations. And I've got a short video for you now where Aloka tells you a little bit more of her story, and you can kind of see some of the tea gardens. And then at the end, it talks a little bit about how much money what that would do for people in the tea gardens and people affected by leprosy. So if I'm going to play it, if you can't hear anything, please someone shout at me and I'll try again.
In the beautiful tea gardens of Bangladesh, the air is fresh and you can hear the chatter of the tea pickers and the birds singing above them. But while the trees and tea shrubs flourish, an invasive weed has taken root: leprosy. This feared disease is more common here than anywhere else in the world, and nearly every family is affected by leprosy. Fathers, mothers, and children too. If leprosy is not stopped now, there will be devastating consequences, not only for those working in the tea gardens, but for the whole of Bangladesh.
My name is Aloka Gonju, and I live with my family in the tea gardens. Everything I do is for my family. I want them to have a good life. I worked in the tea gardens picking leaves for about 40 years. Every day before the sun has barely risen, I walk 15 kilometers to work. 2 years ago, I noticed a small discolored patch on my left hand. It didn't seem to cause any problems at first, so I carried on working. But over time, I lost the strength in my hand. My fingers became stiff and bent. I really struggled to grip the tea leaves and pull them off the bushes. I can't carry or hold anything with my left hand anymore. As my hands slowly got weaker, I was overwhelmed with worry. Who would look after me and my family if I couldn't work? Without my job, we'd also lose our home. I felt sick with stress and lost a lot of weight. How would we survive? Someone doing health screening from the Leprosy Mission came to my house. She noticed my hands and sent me for a test. I had leprosy. I'm thankful because she found me and made sure I had the medicine I needed. But I'm sad that I was cured too late to stop the damage to my hand. I need help to make my hand work again because I can't earn enough now. I work as fast as I can to pick as many leaves as possible, but I can only pick half the amount I used to, and half the leaves means half the pay. If my hand gets worse, I'll have no reason to live. I want to look after my family, to pick tea and earn enough. I don't want anyone else to suffer like me. I tell people to go to the doctor for treatment. Please help us to find people with leprosy so they can be cured. My dream is that there would be no more leprosy cases in the tea gardens.
I work in the tea gardens and I diagnose and treat more than 250 people every year. I dress wounds caused by leprosy and teach people how to care for disabled limbs themselves. I am so happy every time someone is found and cured from leprosy, but I know there are so many more people who need to be found before it's too late. The disease is still spreading. We have to stop it right now. Please, will you help us?
Today in the tea gardens of Bangladesh, there are many people like Aloka who need to be cured before leprosy devastates their bodies. People living in fear for the future. People losing the ability to work and care for their families. Leprosy must not be allowed to continue to spread. It must be rooted out now. We believe that every person deserves life in all its fullness. With your help, we will train healthcare workers to find, diagnose, and cure people with leprosy. Your compassion can prevent disability, protect livelihoods, and finally stop the spread of this disease. Together, we can create a future where leprosy has no hold over families and communities in Bangladesh, a future where people will truly flourish.
So hopefully that gave you a little insight into the problems in Bangladesh in the tea gardens and the high cases of leprosy, but also a little bit about the work that the Leprosy Mission do. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I don't know if we have time. If anybody had any questions, do let me know. Yes, Yanis.
So you mentioned before that it can spread. What's the most common way of leprosy spreading? I mean, because again, I still think of it, and I'm sure many people do, as a disease from pre-Jesus. But the fact that it's still around is a bit odd. I mean, what's the main spreader of? I mean, because she works in the tea field, so I don't know if it's not touch, is it? Is it touch?
No, so it was always thought that leprosy was transmitted through touch, and that's kind of a little bit where some of the stigma surrounding leprosy comes from, and people being isolated and not being touched and being outcast. But actually, that's not true. It's transmitted through airborne, so through coughing and sneezing. Although leprosy doesn't make you cough and sneeze, it's the bacteria is transmitted through airborne transmission, so when people cough and sneeze. But it's quite a slow growing bacteria in comparison to a lot of the other ones that we see. So it's people who have long and frequent contact with each other, and these tea gardens are overcrowded, and people are living in poverty. They have poor sanitation, poor hygiene, which means they have weak immune systems, so they're susceptible to catching the bacterial disease.
So I guess if there's a lack of nutrition there, that's probably doesn't help, does it?
Yeah, so there's a massive link between leprosy and poverty. And so poverty is poor sanitation, poor hygiene, poor nutrition. And so that's why, especially in these areas of the tea gardens, their level of poverty is quite low. So they're susceptible, and as you say, poor nutrition, poor unclean water, that kind of thing causes a weak immune system, and then they're likely to catch leprosy as well.
You've mentioned before about there is a cure if it's treated. So somebody like a local whose nerves are already knackered, I guess that's the end of it, isn't it? You can't get that feeling back if your nerves are dead. Can you? I mean, how?
Yeah, so the cure is an antibiotic for between 6 months and a year, depending on how much of the bacteria is in your body, and that will stop leprosy attacking the body. So they'll be cured from leprosy. But if your nerves are damaged, I don't know if you know anyone with damaged nerves, you can't regain the feeling in your nerves. So so she won't have feeling in her hand. It makes your fingers claw into the center of your hand, which is this clawed hand. And there is something that Dr. Paul Brand, a famous medical surgeon, where they cut your tendons and they straighten out your hand. It's a really clever surgery, actually. And then a straight hand means there's actually with lots of physiotherapy will mean that there's lots more use of the hand. It doesn't bring back the nerves, but it will help with being able to use your hand.
That's amazing.
Daisy, can I ask a question, please? And
yeah.
that is, obviously, for Westerners, this is, all I kept thinking was going through that, it's terrible. And, just the employers of the tea gardens, they not have programs in place.
Yes, the biggest problem is they're uneducated about leprosy. So there are big companies that own tea gardens like this, but they say, oh yes, we'll do something about it, but they're not educated about the early signs of leprosy because it's not a priority for a lot of people and a lot of governments and organizations. So part of what the Leprosy Mission is doing is training these government workers, community workers outside of the Leprosy Mission to notice the early signs of leprosy and to diagnose people and to get the cure, because obviously the quicker they do, then they can't transmit leprosy, and hopefully then there will be no leprosy in these tea gardens. Right,
and I'm thinking wider, really, to the Western companies. I don't know who owns PG Tips and all the rest of it, and Northern Foods and all the rest of it. Really, I mean, thinking back to ESG, I've done a presentation on this in the past. These organisations really who are buying these, commodities that we use really should be pressing, the supply. Say, look, you got to look after your workers. We'll go elsewhere and do something about this. That pressure should be there. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely, and that's easier said than done.
Yeah, but it is. There's a lot of this. What start to call it. Social responsibility. PCR, something like that. I don't know. Corporate personal responsibility, and it's progressed now into not just having a statement, but actually doing something and be seen to be doing something and reporting what you're doing.
Yeah, we would love these big companies to be doing something about it, and that's part of what we do is advocacy and teaching people about it and telling people that there is a problem so that they're aware, so that they can do something. But yeah, it's a long process.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
I was thinking that the fact that lady's still working is presumably a good sign in the fact that she's not been immediately ostracized from society because of the stigma of leprosy. So there's an improvement in general conditions and the people's view of what people with leprosy can do.
Yeah, definitely.
There's good sign getting there.
Definitely, and that depends on which communities you're in. I think particularly in these tea gardens, they have quite a few people with leprosy, and so they're almost used to it as such. But yeah, you're totally right. She in many stories, she would have been outcast and she wouldn't have been able to work because of the fear of the disease. So hopefully it's moving forward and there's education that people don't have to fear the disease in the way that they do.
Is there a country that's the worst affected by it? Is it mainly an Asian issue, or is it?
India is the worst, but also you have to remember that is a massive country with a very big population. So 60% of leprosy cases are found in India, but obviously they have a massive population.
The thing is about India, and this comes down to political will, doesn't it? They spend so much on space programs and everything, and really should be looking after the, stuff like this. Ultimately.
Yeah.
One question, please, Daisy. So as a community, I'm very touched. I think that was a great presentation, by the way. How can we help support and promote that message for you?
Yeah. Well, I think it's about getting the word out there, so through social media, and telling people a little bit more about the Leprosy Mission. Obviously, if people have groups that they know or people that want to do fundraisers, particularly this year we're doing lots of tea parties. People are having tea parties to raise money for the tea gardens, and actually National Tea Day is on the 21st of April, so we have a particularly big push around April for people who want to do some fundraising and just have a little tea party. So if you know anybody that wants to do that, or you yourself want to do that, then do get in touch, because I have some resources and can help can help support that.
I never knew there was a National Tea Day. What a brilliant day!
There you go.
I think that should be celebrated by everybody. We built an empire on that stuff.
And tea is a very popular thing here in the UK. It's kind of a bit of an identity thing, I think, tea here in the UK.